Come on, guys.
Mom yelled up the stairs.
The photographer is set.
I picked up Fluffy and stroked his fur as I walked down the stairs to the living room. Every year, my family took a Christmas photo and created Christmas cards to send to family and friends. Yeah, I know it's old school, but we love it. Mom and Dad stood behind Joel, my 13-year-old brother, and we sat on stools while Fluffy lay lazily on my lap. As the photographer stood behind the camera, I couldn't help but feel lucky to have such a perfect family.
Everyone say cheese.
Cheese! My family smiled simultaneously into the camera. Little did I know that that Christmas photo was the last photo we ever took out as a perfect family. Hey, my name is Mandy. Before we head back to my story, like this video, and of course, subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you can hear more crazy stories like mine. Now, back to the story.
How about we get a 10-foot tall tree this year?
Joel smiled broadly as we sat around the breakfast table.
Don't you think that's a bit much?
Dad looked at him with a raised eyebrow. But Dad, it's Christmas. What better season than to add a little extra? My eyes twinkled as I helped Mom cut out the cookies from the dough.
She does have a point there, Phil.
Mom added. Before I could comment, the doorbell rang. I excused myself and answered it with Fluffy at my heels. I opened the door and a slender woman with brown hair in a business suit was looking back at me.
Good morning.
She smiled politely.
Can you tell me if Mrs. Archer is in?
Hold on one second. I closed the door and quickly called Mom and told her someone was at the door for her. I watched as Mom opened the door. Was it my imagination or did she look a bit shocked before composing herself quickly? Mom stepped outside and closed the door behind her while I went back to the kitchen to put the cookies in the oven. Who was that? I looked at Mom when she re-entered the kitchen a few minutes later.
Oh, just another person looking for a donation at this time of year.
Mom waved it off.
As soon as these cookies are finished, we will go to that 10-foot tree.
Monday morning, Joel and I arrived just as the school bell rang. I told Joel I would meet him later and hustled to my first class. During our first period, the principal, Mr. Orson, said that the theater arts teacher, Mrs. Hall, got into an accident over the weekend. He said that they have hired a substitute teacher, Mrs. Sullivan, to help with the Christmas production. She and Mrs. Hall's assistant, Mr. Jackson, will work together to make sure that the Christmas play will be successful. After the announcement, the class buzzed with anxiety as we wondered if Mrs. Hall was going to be okay. After school, I met Joel in the school's auditorium to help with the props. We stayed for 2 hours before heading home. As we were walking out of the schoolyard, I noticed her, the mystery woman that had knocked on our door over the weekend. She was chatting with another teacher. I shrugged it off and followed Joel out of the school's gates. During dinner, every night my family always discussed how our day went. When it was my turn, I told my mother about Mrs. Hall and the substitute teacher. I also mentioned that I saw the same woman at school that was at the house a few days ago. Dad shot Mom a worried look. Dad changed the conversation, and as soon as we finished dinner, Mom suggested that we sing carols. After singing carols, we told our parents goodnight, and I went to Joel's room and closed the door behind me. Did you notice Mom's reaction when I told her about the woman at school?
Who was she?
I don't know, but I bet Mom and Dad know who she is. All I know is that she's the same woman that Mom said wanted a donation a few days ago. We need to find out who she is.
Do you think it's that serious?
Joel looked at me curiously. I nodded. If it affects Mom and Dad, I think it is. Before we went to bed, Joel and I agreed that we would get to the bottom of it. Before setting up props the next afternoon in the auditorium, Mr. Jackson introduced me to the mystery woman who was indeed Mrs. Sullivan.
Hi, nice to meet you. And thank you for helping out on set.
Mrs. Sullivan extended her hand and I shook it.
How is life at home? Is everything okay at home?
I tilted my head to the side and looked at Mrs. Sullivan curiously as I wondered why she would even think to ask me a question like that. Everything is great at home. My family and I share a special bond and my home life is quite happy. I think I should get back to working on props. I smiled and turned to walk away, but Mrs. Sullivan grabbed my wrist, her eyes narrowed.
Your family is not what it seems.
I pulled away my arm and walked out of the auditorium. What did she mean? Mom! Dad! I yelled as soon as I walked into the house.
Mom and Dad decided to get an early head start to Christmas shopping this year.
Joel announced as he casually walked down the stairs. I quickly told him about the events that occurred in the auditorium.
Something is definitely up.
Joel stroked his chin thoughtfully. Things are getting way too weird. Let's search the office quickly before they come back. We may find a clue as to who this mystery woman might be. After about 30 minutes, Joel looked at me.
Nothing. I don't think this is such a good idea. I mean, Mom and Dad never lied to us before.
I was almost ready to agree with him when my eyes lit up. We've just been looking in the wrong place. I walked over to the family painting on the wall and removed it to reveal a safe. Joel's jaw dropped.
How did you know about this?
I have my ways. I winked at him. Truth is, I seen my mom opening it one night when she thought I was already asleep. Now we need to find the correct combination. We tried a series of different combinations. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. But nothing. Time was running out and we needed to get into the safe.
How about 5062006?
I looked at him weirdly, but tried it anyway. When the safe beeped, we beamed at each other. We quickly pulled out the documents from the safe and searched them. When I came across my family birth certificates, I didn't think too much of it. Until I realized there were 6 and not 4. I quickly took a photo of the extra 2 papers.
Mandy, Joe, we're home.
Mom's voice called. Joel and I quickly threw the papers back into the safe and closed the door. When I replaced the painting, I noticed the combination code neatly signed at the bottom of the painting. We walked out of the office and inhaled deeply. We calmly walked down the stairs and met our parents. That evening, we made gingerbread houses, and it almost seemed like everything was okay. Until later that night.
Mandy, wake up.
Mom shook me hysterically. I opened my eyes groggily and pushed myself into a sitting position. What's wrong, Mom?
Joel is missing.
I jumped out of bed and ran to Joel's room. I looked around Joel's room in horror. Things were thrown all over the room and his window was broken. But what made me feel sick to my stomach was the red writing on the wall that read, "Your family is not what it seems." Mom took me gently by the shoulders and steered me downstairs towards the kitchen. Dad was sitting by the table with his head in his hands. With tears streaming down my face, I asked my parents who Mrs. Sullivan was. Mom insisted that she wasn't anyone we should be worried about, but Dad looked at me, his eyes apologetic. Just as Dad was about to speak, the doorbell rang.
That must be the officers. You stay here, Mandy.
Mom kissed me on the cheek and she and Dad went to the front door. Joel was missing and they were still lying. A few minutes later, my parents walked back into the kitchen. "Who is Mrs. Sullivan?" I asked sternly. When neither of them answered, I stood up and threw a kitchen chair across the room. "Joel is missing. Who is Mrs. Sullivan? We found birth certificates tonight. One of a girl older than I am and one of a boy the same age as Joel. Who is Mrs. Sullivan?" I yelled. Dad cleared his throat. His eyes were red and swollen with tears.
Have a seat, Mandy.
Dad waited for me to sit before he and Mom sat opposite me.
Mrs. Sullivan's real name is Marissa Archer. She's our daughter. When she was 16, her boyfriend got into a motorcycle accident, and a few weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. She had a mental breakdown after the baby and was in a mental institution.
I don't remember having a sister, but what does this have to do with Joel?
Joel is the baby. When we had to send Marissa away, we decided to take you kids away from all the small town gossip. We still visited Mandy every weekend. The doctor said that she would never live a normal life and she would always need medication. We didn't want Joel growing up in that type of environment. Marissa was 14 when you were born. The doctors told us that after Marissa, we wouldn't be able to have any other children. Then you came along and we had Joel to take care of. So we thought the best thing to do would be to make you both think that you were siblings and not aunt and nephew.
I shook my head in disgust and got up from the table. You should have told us. You should have told us! I banged the kitchen table and ran into my room crying. The house was chaotic the next 2 days as police continued to come in and out as they searched Joel's room for clues. By the 3rd day, I needed to get out for some fresh air. I pulled on some clothes and walked out of the house. The cool night air felt good against my skin. I walked for a few minutes, and when I looked up, I realized I was standing at the front of the school. I walked into the gates into the auditorium. I noticed Mr. Jackson's car was still there and figured he was doing some last-minute preparations for the school play. I walked into the auditorium, and it was empty. I sat in the front row thinking about all the times Joel and I either helped with stage props or acted in the plays at the school. I closed my eyes. Thump, thump. My eyes shot open and I darted around. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. Then a few seconds later, the thumping resumed. "Hello?" I said louder. This time, the thumping grew more intense. I followed the sound to the back of the stage. Below the stage was the storage area where we kept different props when they were not in use. The door to the storage area was slightly opened. I walked cautiously inside and allowed my eyes to grow accustomed to the dark. In a corner, I noticed someone sitting on a chair. I ran to the lights and flicked it on. My heart raced when I realized that it was Joel. I ran to him and removed the gag from his mouth before removing the ropes from his legs and hands. "I'm so happy you're safe."
Mrs. Sullivan said if I made any noise that she was going to hurt the students and teachers at the school. But when I realized that everyone had left for the night, then I heard your voice. I knew it was safe.
Just then, a shadow fell on the doorway. I looked up and saw Mr. Jackson. Joel froze, but I welcomed the help. "Mr. Jackson, can you please call the police and tell them that we found my brother?" Mr. Jackson swung a bat casually in his hands.
And why would I do that, Miss Archer? My wife has been looking for her son for quite some time after your mother decided to steal him from her.
With trembling hands, I quickly removed the ropes and shielded Joel behind me. I slowly removed my phone from my back pocket and slipped it into Joel's hands. We looked at Mr. Jackson as he moved slowly around the room. I moved slowly with Joel still behind me until we were close to the door. Suddenly I yelled, "Run, Joel, and call for help!" before I threw all my weight into Mr. Jackson's body. Mr. Jackson grunted as he fell to the ground. I watched as Joel bolted out of the room as I scrambled to my feet. Mr. Jackson grabbed a hold of one of my legs and dragged me towards him. I kicked and screamed loudly as I grasped for anything that I could use as a weapon. Finally, my fingers held on to 2 feet of steel pipe. I swung it at Mr. Jackson, who was now hovering over me, and it made contact to the side of his head. I took those few seconds he was dazed to run out of the room. When I ran outside, I saw Joel talking to 2 teachers who were returning to drop off an extra prop. They told us to stay in the parking lot until the police arrived, while they secured Mr. Jackson. They ran towards the auditorium, and Joel and I held each other tight. Later that night, when the police dropped us home, Joel asked Mom and Dad why Mrs. Sullivan and Mr. Jackson kidnapped him. They said that last year they lost a son that looked just like him. They said that she was a very sick woman and that he shouldn't worry about her anymore. Joel seemed to accept that answer, and I decided to let it slide. We decided as a family to spend the holidays away from the home. Since the police had still not found Mrs. Sullivan, we eventually decided to pack up and leave our home, just in case Mrs. Sullivan decided to return. 2 years have now passed, and my brother still doesn't know the real reason why he was kidnapped, and Mrs. Sullivan, or should I say Marissa, still has not been caught. Should I tell Joel the truth? Or should I respect my parents' wishes to keep it a secret from him? Tell me what you think in the comments below.
I stood there nervously watching, waiting for the big reveal. A huge blanket was hanging over my house, keeping it hidden from sight. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a drum roll and the blanket dropped to the floor. Wow! Just wow! My house was made of gold. I was stunned by the image before me. All around me, people were gasping and clapping and shouting congratulations to me. A man from the local newspaper came over and pointed his microphone in my face. Cameras flashed left, right, and center.
What do you think of your house?
It's amazing. But before I go on, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. If you do, you might end up with a house made of gold too. How did I get a gold house? Well, let me start at the beginning. Ever since I was a young boy, I had always been into adventure. I kind of saw myself as a bit of an Indiana Jones character. I was always going off on imaginary adventures. By the time I was in my teens, the urge for adventure had become like an obsession to me. Everything I did and everywhere I went, I was looking for excitement. So when my parents told me that we were going on holiday to Mexico, I could hardly contain myself. Oh my God, I can't wait. I'm going to have so many adventures in Mexico.
Come on now, Tom. Don't get too excited.
I wasn't going to let my parents dampen my enthusiasm. I knew that they weren't that happy about my sense of adventure. They were always worried I would end up in some kind of trouble. Okay, Dad, I'll calm down. I counted down the days to our trip to Mexico. Eventually, the day arrived and we left for the airport. The moment we landed in Mexico, I could feel the excitement building up inside of me. The first thing I want to do is to go looking for lost treasure. My parents looked at each other skeptically.
I don't think you're going to find any treasure, Tom. Why don't you just enjoy your holiday at the beach?
I wasn't going to let them put me off. I pleaded with them to let me go off on my own, and eventually they gave in and agreed to let me. The following morning, straight after breakfast, I set off with my map and some provisions in my rucksack. I had done some research before I left home, and I knew exactly where I wanted to head to. Behind our hotel was a mountain range, and it was rumored to be filled with hundreds of hidden caves. I felt sure that I would find something interesting in there. It didn't take me long to find a hole leading inside the mountain. I made my way inside. It was dark inside, so I took out the flashlight and began to shine it around. The passageway led deep inside the mountain, too far for me to be able to see the end. I was just beginning to make my way inside when suddenly about a dozen spears shot out of the rocky wall and blocked my path. Now what am I going to do? I can't get past these. I looked around me to see what could have caused them to appear. I noticed immediately that I had walked through an infrared light. I opened my rucksack and took out a book. I took aim and threw it across the beam of light. Immediately, the spears returned into their position inside the rock. Well, that wasn't too difficult. I carried on a bit further up the passageway. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from above me. A huge boulder was hurtling down towards me. I leaped forward, managing to avoid it just in time. The sound of it crashing to the floor behind me gave me a fright. Wow, that was close. I'd better keep my wits about me. When I got to the end of the passageway, I could see a door in front of me. I tried to open it, but it was locked and there didn't seem to be any way of unlocking it. As I began to search the area for some kind of mechanism to open the door, I suddenly spotted a puzzle built into the floor. It had different shaped holes, and to the left of the puzzle was a pile of stones of all different shapes. I began to search through them, trying them out one by one in each of the holes in the puzzle. Yes! I gave a shout of delight when I found the first stone that fitted perfectly into its matching hole. One by one, I began to fill up the puzzle until finally there was only one hole left to complete. I searched the pile of stones, but nothing seemed to fit. Just when I was about to give up hope, I noticed a little ledge built into the side of the rock. I reached up, and sure enough, on top of the ledge was a small stone. I placed it into the last remaining hole. As soon as it slipped into place, I heard a weird grinding noise, and the door in front of me began to slide open. When I saw what was behind the door, I nearly fainted. The room was filled with tons and tons of gold. I ran inside and began filling my rucksack with the gold. There was so much, though, I couldn't possibly carry it all. I decided that I would take as much as I could and then go back later for the rest. When I got back to the hotel, I ran straight to find my parents. Mom, Dad, I found treasure.
What did you find?
Probably some fake jewelry or something, I bet.
I opened my rucksack and showed my parents the gold. There's nothing fake about this, and there's lots more back in the mountains.
I think you better show us what you have found, Tom.
I took my parents back to the room where the gold was. When they saw the amount that was in there, they were shocked, to say the least.
Don't tell anyone about this, Tom. We will sort it out, okay?
Yes, Dad, of course. My parents returned the next day with a team of workers. They melted all the gold down and transported it out of the mountain. Once they had it all out, they arranged for it to be shipped back to our home. But even though they managed to get it out under the radar, they hit a problem. Where were they going to store it? It was while I was watching a TV show about a character who lives in a house made of cheese that I came up with the idea. I told my parents what I had thought of. We should make a house made from gold. No one will question where we got the gold from. They'll probably think we're trying to break a world record or something.
That sounds like a great idea, Tom. We will make a big announcement. Tell everyone what we are planning.
Great idea. No one will be suspicious if we're open about what we were doing. So that's what we did. My dad organized for a documentary team to follow our journey. They recorded every detail. Builders came in and began to build the house using our gold. When it was eventually ready, my dad told everyone that the big reveal would be broadcasted live on television. Finally, the day came for the big reveal. I stood beside my parents in the front garden, waiting for the blanket that was covering our house to be dropped. A drum rolled, and then whoosh, the blanket dropped to the ground. Lights were flashing from all directions as news teams and camera crews got their first images of our gold house.
Congratulations! I've never seen anything like this in my life!
Wow!
What do you think of your house?
It's amazing. Eventually, the last of the reporters packed up and left. We had spent hours answering their questions and posing for photos. Well then, what are we waiting for? I guess it's time to move into our new home. I followed my parents into the house. It was literally blinding. Everything was made from gold. Gold walls, gold doors, gold cupboards, and even gold beds. To be honest, it was a bit too much. But we had made it, so now we had to live in it. About a week after we moved in, my dad's sister and her family came to visit us. They were gobsmacked when they saw the inside of the house.
This is something else. I never imagined there'd be so much gold.
My two cousins became quite giddy when they saw all the gold. They began running around the room, pushing and shoving each other. Suddenly, one of them pushed his brother so hard he went flying into the wall, making a big dent in it. When I saw the dent, my mouth dropped in shock. I looked over at my parents to see if they had seen what I had seen. They obviously had, because their faces were full of shock too. The dent in the wall had revealed that underneath the top layer of gold was just ordinary plaster. My dad went over to the wall and began to chip away at it.
I don't believe it. The house is built just like any normal house, only it has a thin layer of gold paint over everything.
So where's the gold then?
That's what I want to know too.
It didn't take us long to discover that the whole house was like it. And not only that, the gold paint covering it wasn't even real gold. It was fake gold paint.
Look now, we're not going to tell anyone what we have discovered. We will do some investigating and try to get to the bottom of it.
My parents began to look into the team of builders that they had hired.
Someone in that team must know where our gold is, and I intend to find out.
What are you going to do, Dad?
Just leave it to me. I'm going to sort it out.
The next day, my dad left the house really early. He didn't tell Mom or me where he was going. The hours ticked away as we sat and waited for him to come back. I hope he hasn't got into any trouble. We don't know what this team might be capable of. But when Dad got home, we were shocked to see that he had a man with him. The man's hands were tied behind his back, and Dad pushed him down into a chair.
Now tell us what happened to our gold. I don't know. Don't lie. Tell us now or you're going to regret it. Okay, I'll tell you. Just don't hurt me.
Go on then. Tell us what you did.
Someone contacted us and told us that if we helped him, he would pay us a lot of money.
What did he ask you to do?
He said we should build an ordinary house and paint it with fake gold paint, then give the real gold to him. So that's what we did.
Who was the man? What is his name?
His name is Brian Evergreen.
My parents looked at each other in shock. I had never heard the name before. Just by the looks on their faces, it was obvious they knew who he was. Who is he, Dad?
Brian was a co-worker of ours. We worked together on some, let's say, on some work that wasn't quite legal.
Before I had a chance to react to what my dad had told me, we suddenly heard a loud crash from outside. We ran out to see what it was. We couldn't believe it. A van had crashed into our garden fence. I could see a man getting out of the van.
Brian!
I looked around at my dad. So this must be Brian Evergreen.
Release the worker you have kidnapped right now, or I will reveal to the public that it was you and your son that stole the treasure without telling anyone, and you know that that's illegal.
Okay, we will release him on one condition. You give us $100 million to compensate.
I'm not giving you a cent.
Well, if you don't, then we will tell everyone that you stole the gold from us.
I don't have the gold.
What do you mean you don't have the gold? The worker told us he gave it to you.
Yes, that's right, he did. And I threw it all into the ocean.
What? Why would you do that? You idiot!
You know exactly why I did it, don't you?
I looked at my parents to see if they knew what he was talking about, but neither of them said anything.
Do you think I would let you get away with what you did to me? You crossed me on that gig, and I ended up spending the last 10 years of my life in jail. I've been waiting to get my revenge on you, and now I've finally done it. This is your payback.
I looked at my parents' faces. They both looked distraught, and that was exactly how I was feeling too. After all our hard work, finding the treasure, bringing it back, and building the house, all we were left with now was an ordinary house with a disgusting layer of fake gold all over it.
I watched as Lucas walked along the school corridor. He was so handsome and one of the most popular boys in the school. Everyone wanted to date him, including my best friend Julia and me. Look who it is, I said to Julia. Yes, and look who's behind him, she replied, giggling. I turned to see who she was looking at. It was Dylan. He was one of the ugliest boys in the school, inside and out. But before I go on, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more crazy stories. Julie and I had agreed a long time ago that we would never fall out over a boy. That's why we didn't mind that both of us liked Lucas. But so far, neither of us had gotten anywhere with him. We really need to up our game, Julia, I said. Of course, I want to date him, but if it's you that he wants to date, then I would be fine with that. But it would be terrible if neither of us dated him. You know what, Abigail? I think we should make this interesting, said Julia. In what way? I think we should make a little bet. Whoever's the one that gets a date with Lucas is the winner, but the loser has to date Dylan. The thought of having to date Dylan was enough to spur me on. There was no way I was going to lose. You'd better start preparing yourself for your date with Dylan, I told Julia. You're kidding, aren't you? I'm going to be dating Lucas before you know it, she replied. With that, I watched as she ran off and caught up with Lucas. She walked all the way to class with him. I saw that he was laughing at something she had said. I knew that I really needed to come up with a good plan to get him. So, I decided that I would hold a singing competition. Everyone in school had to enter because it was for charity. I organized it with the music teacher and told all the kids that they had to sing a song. Friday afternoon when school finished, instead of heading off straight home, we all piled into the main hall. One by one, all of the kids stood up on the stage and sang the song they had prepared. Some of them weren't too bad, but some were terrible. Next, it was Julia's turn to get up on stage. Go on, Julia. What are you waiting for? I asked. She turned to me and scowled. I can't believe you've done this. You know I can't sing. I just laughed. Don't be silly. It's all a bit of fun. Julia got up on stage and began to sing. I had never heard anything like it. The sound coming out of her mouth was like a cross between owls screeching and babies screaming. Everyone put their hands to their ears. I looked over at Lucas to see what his reaction was. His face was contorted as though he was in real pain. Next, it was my turn to get up and sing. I picked up the microphone and began to sing. Immediately, everyone stopped what they were doing and just stood and stared at me. I had always been a good singer, but I had never sung in front of an audience before. When I finished, everyone started clapping and cheering. The music teacher stood up and said, "Well, kids, I think we have our winner." I smiled as she handed me my winning trophy. As I walked off the stage, I made sure to walk past Lucas. Well done, Abigail. You have a great voice. Thank you, Lucas. That means a lot. My heart was literally singing inside. I felt sure that it wouldn't be long before he asked me out on a date. That was so embarrassing, said Julia. You weren't that bad, I told her. I bet Lucas thinks I'm a complete idiot. I wanted to agree with her, but didn't want to appear mean. So I just told her that I was sure he wouldn't hold it against her. When I got home that evening, I was so happy. I lay in bed dreaming about my date with Lucas. The following morning, I was doing some chores for my mom when the phone rang. It was Julia. Sorry, Abigail, I'm not going to be able to come shopping with you today. I'm not feeling that great. Oh, that's a shame. Well, I hope you feel better soon. I put the phone down. I was disappointed that Julia had canceled our plans. I'd been looking forward to going into town all week. I wanted to buy myself a new dress and shoes. Oh well, there's nothing stopping me from going shopping on my own. I got myself ready and took the bus into town. I looked around the shops for a while, trying on dresses and shoes until I found exactly what I was looking for. Once I had made my purchases, I realized that I was feeling really hungry. I think I'll go and get myself a burger. A new American diner had just opened in town, and I had been wanting to try it for ages. I decided that I would go there and get some lunch. When I got there, the place was really busy. I asked the waitress for a table for one person, and she told me to follow her. As we made our way through the diner, I looked around at the people dining there. All of a sudden, I stopped in my tracks. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was Julia, and she was sitting with Lucas. My mouth dropped open in shock. Just at that moment, Julia looked up and caught my eye. She smiled at me and waved. "Come and join us," she called out. I wandered over to their table. "Hi there, what are you two doing?" I asked. "Oh, Lucas asked me out on a date." My stomach literally turned over. I couldn't believe it. Julia had won the bet. Now I was going to have to date Dylan. Oh really? That's so nice. It was the least I could do after last night's singing fiasco, said Lucas. I could see she needed cheering up. I couldn't believe that my plan had backfired. I hadn't expected Lucas to feel sorry for Julia. I thought that he would want to date me because of my amazing voice. Well, have fun, you two. Aren't you staying? Asked Julia. Nope, I've suddenly lost my appetite. I left the diner and went home. I hadn't been home long when I got a text from Julia. Don't forget to ask Dylan for a date. I threw the phone across the room. Ugh, just the thought of going on a date with Dylan made my stomach turn. But I knew I had no choice. A bet is a bet. Monday morning at school, I went straight up to Dylan. I knew there was no point in delaying it. Hi, Dylan. Can I ask you something? If you want. Would you like to go on a date with me? Yeah, okay, sure. We arranged to meet up the following weekend. I really wasn't looking forward to our date, but I hate to admit it. I actually had a really good time. Dylan was really funny and really nice to me. He was a real gentleman, held doors open for me, and just made sure I had a really good time. The day after my date, I met up with Julia. How did your date with Dylan go? It went really well. He's a really nice guy. How about you? How are you and Lucas getting on? Julia looked a bit miserable. To be honest, he's actually a bit mean. What do you mean? He's always late for our dates and never apologizes. He's also a bit boring. The following week, it was Valentine's Day. I wasn't expecting Dylan to get me anything. After all, we had only been on a couple of dates. I was sitting in my bedroom when I heard my mom calling me from downstairs. I went down and there was Dylan standing in my hallway with the biggest bunch of flowers I had ever seen. Happy Valentine's Day, Abigail. I took the flowers from him, blushing. Thank you, Dylan. They're beautiful. Later that afternoon, I called Julia and told her what Dylan had bought for me. What about you? What did you get from Lucas? Nothing. Not even a card. I was really confused. I had always heard that Lucas was a really nice, generous person. Everyone praised him, and actually thinking about it, people had always said that Dylan was really mean and nasty. It just doesn't make sense. Don't worry too much about it. Anyway, don't forget, we have Isabel's pool party to look forward to, I said. Yes, I can't wait. It'll be so much fun. Isabel was having a pool party for her 16th birthday. Her parents had a huge house, and everyone in our year was invited. It was going to be the party of the year. I went to the party with Dylan, and as soon as we got there, we went to find Julia and Lucas. They were sitting on sunbeds at the side of the pool. Come on, what are you waiting for? Let's get in the pool. Julia and I dove straight in. When we came back to the surface, Lucas and Dylan were still sitting on the sunbeds. Come on, you two, it's gorgeous in here. Maybe later, said Dylan. Julia and I swam off to join some of our friends. I don't know what's up with those two, she said. Never mind, we will have fun even if they don't. We spent the whole afternoon splashing about in the pool. Dylan and Lucas didn't even get their toes wet. We started arranging a lot of double dates for the four of us. But the more time I spent with them, I realized that Julia was right. Lucas wasn't that nice of a person. I was really pleased that I had lost the bet. Dylan was such a nice guy and treated me really well. I was so happy. Let's go to the beach on Sunday, I said to Dylan. We'll invite Julia and Lucas too. Dylan wasn't that keen at first, but he eventually agreed. Sunday morning, we set off to the beach. As soon as we got there, Julia and I changed into our swimsuits and headed into the ocean for a swim. The boys sat looking at their phones. Why don't you come in the water? It's so hot out here. Surely you want to cool off. But neither Lucas or Dylan seemed interested in going for a swim. Julia and I just looked at each other and shrugged our shoulders. It's a bit weird that neither of them want to get in the water, isn't it? She said. Maybe we should organize a picnic in the park next weekend, I said. They'll probably enjoy that more. The following weekend, we packed up a picnic basket with sandwiches and drinks and set off to the park. Lucas brought a ball along and the boys played football whilst Julia and I prepared our lunch. This was a good idea, she said. The boys seem much happier here than at the beach. Yeah, they look like they're having a good time. We got all the food out and shouted to the boys to come and get something to eat. They came running over and sat down on the picnic rug. We had just started eating when all of a sudden there was a huge clap of thunder, followed by a flash of lightning. Oh no, looks like there's going to be a storm, I said. We quickly started packing up all the food, but just as we had got it all in the basket, the heavens opened up and the rain came pouring down. There was nowhere for us to shelter. We began to make a run for it, but all of a sudden Julia let out a scream. Lucas, what's happening to your face? She cried. I turned to look at Lucas. I couldn't believe what I saw. His face was literally melting away. Dylan, it's happening to you too, said Julia. I looked at Dylan and it was true. His face was melting too. At first I was horrified, but slowly as his face melted away, I saw what was hidden underneath. Wait a minute, you're not Dylan, you're Lucas, I said. Julia looked at me. You haven't been dating Dylan at all. All along you were dating Lucas. I think you owe us an explanation, boys, I said. Dylan, or rather, Lucas, looked at me. I'm sorry we tricked you, but we just wanted to conduct a little experiment of our own. Lucas explained that him and Dylan had come up with a plan to see if girls actually dated someone for their look or for their personality too. They had put on masks of each other's faces to trick us into thinking they were the other person. It turns out that you didn't care that I wasn't good looking. You still wanted to date me because I treated you nicely, said the real Lucas. After we found out who we really were dating, things changed for Julia. She decided that she wasn't going to put up with Dylan being mean to her any longer. She broke up with him. I hadn't been bothered that my boyfriend wasn't good looking. I was happy at the time because he treated me well. But I have to admit, it's even better now that I'm dating the gorgeous Lucas.